Hello and welcome back to my channel where I review books that came out 6 months ago. That's kind of a joke, except this video was going to be a review for the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It just turns out that I ended up DNFing it after 100 pages because I had the whole thing figured out and I was deeply annoyed by that. I know I just said that this isn't going to be a review for the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but I do want to talk about it for just a brief minute, because I want to explain why I decided to DNF the book. I did not finish this book because immediately after the main female protagonist was introduced, I had like all the pieces clicked together in my head and I knew how the entire book was gonna go. It was pretty much from the very beginning. It hit beat for beat, pretty much exactly where I was expecting it to. Right up and through when we introduced Lucy Gray, because it clicked with me. Lucy Gray, Snow, and the Wordsworth poem that her name is based on. Because in the Wordsworth poem, the character Lucy Gray gets lost in the snow and presumably dies. So I put together, after realizing that the character Lucy Gray in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes will presumably die at the hands or because of Coriolanus Snow. And when I had that figured out, like, once you know what the climax of the book is going to be, there's no reason to finish it, you know what I mean? And, like, prequels are already pretty low stakes because you already know what's going to happen to the character because you've read the initial series. So it's already low stakes because you know what happens to them. And then we were given another layer of predictability by adding in a complete rip from a poem that's existed for 100 years. Like, it was just frustrating to me. And I was explaining this to my mother and she said, you know, well, it just sounds like a cash grab. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. But since it was just a crash grab, why didn't you make the book about a character that we were interested in reading a prequel about? Because out of all of the things that people were predicting this book was going to be about, none of them were Coriolanus Snow and his upbringing. Everybody thought, oh, maybe we'll get the first Hunger Games, maybe we'll get Mags's Hunger Games, maybe we'll get an insight into like a fan favorite character. And we didn't get that. Nobody's favorite character is the dictator who sanctions child murder. I need to stop talking about this because it's deeply frustrating for me. And also, that's not what this video is about. This video was actually intended to be a deep dive into the Hunger Games series because I reread them in anticipation of reading the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And while I was reading them, I realized that the Hunger Games is this crazy amalgamation of everything that I love in a YA book, but also every single trope that has ever annoyed me ever in any YA and middle grade book. And it's a wonder to me that I enjoy this series because there are so many things in it that make me go, oh my god, why would you write that? But it has this really good core and really great human characters that feel like people who I know and people who I could meet in real life, if that makes any sense at all. I kind of want to go like point by point through the things that I really loved about the Hunger Games series and things that were deeply frustrating to me, but that have a really great twist on them that make them not even tolerable but enjoyable. Does that make sense? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with the bad points and I'm gonna end with the good points because I want to end on a good note. After raging about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes for 5 minutes at the beginning of this video, I want to end on a high note. So I'm gonna start with the bad and with the good. The first thing about the Hunger Games that's a little bit like, is the fact that there is a heavy helping of the Chosen One trope. So if you don't know what the Chosen One trope is, think Divergent, Maze Runner, Percy Jackson, and especially Harry Potter. They literally call him the Chosen One in the book. Essentially, a Chosen One is just, like, everything would fall apart if this specific person with this specific skill set was not here at the perfect moment. And Hunger Games does fall into that category, I think loosely, and I'm gonna come back to that later, but because it's such just an overdone trope. I did add it to this section. I forgot that I wrote this. So the second thing is I wrote it in all caps with about 10 eyes. Prim! And she was a fan favorite character. I think a lot of people read it and they think, oh, it's so sad because Prim is dead. I look at this and I think this is kind of a bummer because it negates the entire story. The only reason that Katniss has to become the Mockingjay, to go into the Hunger Games, to do all of these things, is because she wanted to save Prim from that first Hunger Games in the first book. And everything just snowballed from there. It was all to save Prim. And the fact that Prim died in the 11th hour makes me go, wow, so I read all of that and she's still dead. But yeah, like the main character's entire arc was hinging on the fact that she wanted to keep her sister alive from that very first Hunger Games. And the fact that she still died in the 11th hour was just so sad and such a bummer, because I was like, wow, I just read these 3 books and the catalyst for the entire story didn't even matter. The thing that frustrates me the most, hands down, about this series is, and I want to read it word for word from here because it makes the most sense the way I wrote it down last night. Oh my god. Introducing tertiary characters who were only created to be killed while keeping the entire cast of main and secondary characters alive. Yeah. So that's a huge kind of quibble that I have with a lot of YA books. Basically, they introduce these tertiary side characters so that they can kill off those and keep their main guys alive. Think about in the 3rd book Mockingjay when they introduced all of those characters that were going to go with Katniss into the capital city. You have Mahershala Ali, Anne Boleyn, and her, like, camera crew, and Jackson, and those blonde girls with guns. And they all, like, as soon as they were introduced in Mockingjay, I was like, okay, that, like, I would be surprised if one of them comes out alive, because typically that kind of character is introduced specifically to die. And that is what I kind of anticipated to happen. Honestly, I was stunned that, oh my god, she's not Anne, but she's Anne Boleyn from the Tudors. What is her name in this? Google.com. Cressida. I had to Google it. The fact that Cressida came out alive at the end of that whole shebang honestly blew my mind. I thought that they were all written in just to die, though, like, Mahershala, the camera crew, and the blonde girls were all clearly written in just to die. While we're at it, can we talk about predictable deaths? Because Phoenix was super predictable. You do that, you give this character all the happiness in the world and a wedding, there's nowhere, like, that's the top. There's nowhere you can go from there, so there has to be a huge downfall, and the only realistic downfall in a Hunger Games book is just, you know. So I pretty much knew from that scene where they were like, and there's a wedding, I was like, oh, so he's gonna be dead in like 20 pages. And lo and behold, that's exactly how it happened. Fun fact, I don't think I'd ever read Mockingjay until this reread, because I didn't remember that Finnick died. I think that, like, while I was in school, I had read the Hunger Games, like the first book of the Hunger Games, and I read Catching Fire, and then maybe just skipped Mockingjay and watched the movies. I think that may have been what I did, because I was turning pages in Mockingjay like I had never read it before. I was like, wow, this is pretty good, you know? But yeah, just to get back to the point, I feel like in a series where the entire, like, special sauce of the book is, like, state-sanctioned murder, there needs to be more deaths, like, in the main cast of characters, because if you think about it, really, I mean, Peeta's family was killed, but we as the reader, and Katniss as the narrator, did not know Peeta's family, so that didn't hit us like it would have hit us if Effie or Haymitch or Peeta, Gale, or Katniss, if one of them had been killed in the 11th hour. That would have made more sense to me, and I feel like it would have been more moving. And if you ask me, I really, really think the only way to get a huge impact out of a book like this is to kill a main character. So they would have had, in order for me personally to have felt like an entire gut punch, like they would have had to have killed Peeta or Katniss. But I think Suzanne Collins fell into the trap that a lot of authors fall into, which is, I need to save my characters in case I decide to come back to this world later. Don't save your characters, just make new ones, you know? You did it with Lucy Gray. Make a new character. Kill Katniss, make a new character. The final negative point that I have is the fact that while Mockingjay was super boring, it was also inexplicably way too short. The way that I describe this to people is, to me, it felt like when I was reading The Hunger Games, it felt very much like I was reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Then when I was reading Catching Fire, it felt very much like I was reading Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. And then it felt like in the final book of the Hunger Games series, they just tried to cram in like 3 through 7 into 400 pages. It wasn't enough to get in everything that we needed. There was so much political unrest. There was what's going on in the Capitol, what's going on in District 13, what's going on amongst the rebels themselves, and then there are all of these side relationships between all of these different characters, and there were not enough pages to get through everything that we needed to get through. I think that there needed to be a 4th book. I think, honestly, if they had busted this book up into 2 parts, like they did the films, if they had broken one into, like, the political book, like Mockingjay Part 1, and then if they had taken, like, Part 2, and it had been, like, the final battle, the build-up, and the battle itself, I feel like that would have been much better. It would have given the author more time to just expound upon what she wanted to expound upon. Because it felt at the same time like there was nothing happening on every page, and then I had gotten 20 pages in and I had somehow missed all of these things, and it was so, like, I needed just more time to mull things over, you know what I mean? And then another point that I wanted to make is the fact that in every scene that led to battle, Katniss was never conscious. The story is told in first person present tense, which means that we are seeing the book through the eyes of Katniss as things are happening to her. So, when she's out cold, we don't get to see the battles. And in every single, like, knockdown, drag-out fight, including the penultimate one at the very end of the book, she is out cold for every single one of them. I wanted to see battle, and I never did. And now on to the good. Some of these are gonna look familiar. So, number 1 on my list of great things about the Hunger Games is that it includes the Chosen One trope, but with a twist. Because when you think of regular Chosen One stories, when you think of Harry Potter, when you think of Divergent, a book where Triss is the Chosen One, specifically because she has a skill set that nobody else that she knows has. Well, that is what the Chosen One trope typically is. The Hunger Games includes the Chosen One trope, but really, not so much through the first book. From the second book into the third book, it very much leans into the Chosen One trope of, oh, you're our Mockingjay, therefore you are the only one that can do the things that we need you to do. But in the first book, it's not so much like that. In the first book, she has no special skills. She comes in with one ability, which is to shoot a bow and arrow, and that is the only ability that she maintains throughout the entire series. She's not good at public speaking. She is not good at doing those propos. She straight up says, you know, I think Peeta would be better at this, and everyone agrees with her. One of my biggest qualms with the Chosen One trope is that, typically in a book that utilizes it, the Chosen One goes from being utterly clueless about this ability, power, thing that they have, to being a complete expert at it in a matter of 50 pages. And that's not the case in the Hunger Games. She never gets particularly good at any of the things that they need her to do. And I found that so intriguing and really refreshing, because even though She is their Mockingjay. She could just as easily be replaced, and she's just as valuable to them dead. They don't really need her as the chosen one. They have chosen the Mockingjay. They haven't chosen Katniss. And I think that's very cool. That's not something that you see in a lot of YA. Another thing that I really like about this series is that any character that you think of, any character in your head, they all have these terrible battle scars, whether they be, you know, psychological or physical. I mean, think about it. Katniss was deaf. She has terrible PTSD. Haymitch is a raging drunk who actually shows withdrawal symptoms within the book on on three separate occasions, which I can't think of another book that does that. Peeta loses a leg. He straight up loses a leg. This point about everyone having their scars is most profoundly shown in the character Joanna. She goes from being this crazy, like, eccentric warrior to her hands shaking so badly from her PTSD that she can't even assemble a weapon, and she's not able to go fight in the Capitol with Katniss and the rest of her team. And I found that really realistic. Like, people don't go through the things that those characters go through and come out perfectly fine, you know, which is one of the quibbles that I have with a lot of YA. Think of Harry Potter. At the very end of the final book, you know, this kid has been tormented for his entire life with this just doom cloud hanging over his head. And then once he's killed Voldemort, he's perfectly fine. He is perfectly content with everything, and they all live happily ever after. And that is not the case in the Hunger Games. These characters are far more realistic than, think Harry Potter, Twilight, Divergent, Percy Jackson. The Hunger Games is a winner in the realism category. Another thing that I really liked about this series is that it really dives into the Pan Am political sphere. When you think about it, when you think of Pan Am politics, the only person that you really think of right off the top is Snow. But when you think about it, there are loyalists and adversaries all over the place in Pan Am. It's not just in the capital, which is immediately what our heads go to, but when you think about it, you've got District 8, Coin, their rebellion, and then you've got all of these loyalists in Districts 1, 2, and 4. A civil war is breaking out within Pan Am, and the capital is planning an even bigger attack on 13, and Coin is a villain. You know, there are so many political pieces, and it very much is kind of like politics today, like in real life. If you think about it, at the very end of the final book in Mockingjay, even though Snow and Katniss are never really allies, Katniss has to take Snow's word that Coin is really the villain here. So that's very much in line with today's politics, you know, kind of the enemy of the enemy is my friend. And usually things are much more black and white in YA and middle grade, which is why when you think about it on a deeper level like that, it really makes you go, huh, that's pretty cool. And finally, one of the things that I love most about this series is that it is told from an unreliable narrator. Thankfully, the unreliable narrator, or a first-person present tense narrator, is becoming more popular in YA. When I was reading YA when I was in school, when I was the appropriate age to be reading these books were very much written from this omniscient perspective where you knew what was going on from every angle at every time. And it really took a lot of the surprise out of books, which is why I quit reading a lot of books in the middle. There was no surprise. I knew the climax of the book 100 pages in, just like I did for the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is why I quit a ton of books, you know. But that was not the case with The Hunger Games. I feel like it's a series that I could read again and again and get that same level of just excitement and expectation every single time that I read it. So that is really, really cool to me. Another thing that's particularly interesting about this series is that it lent itself to film a lot better than I think a lot of other YA series did at the time, because the books were told in first person present tense, we could only see what Katniss was seeing. However, in the movies, it was a little bit different, so we were able to see the rebellions that were going on within the different districts, and I really enjoyed that. The scenes that included the uprisings in 5, 7, and 11 were some of my favorite scenes in the entire, like, film saga. They were so beautiful. The callback to "if we burn, you burn with us."
If we burn, you burn with us!
It still brings a tear to my eye. It was so well done. Oh my gosh, so good. The second movie was the most beautiful movie in the entire saga. It also included what may have been the best slap in cinematic history. I'm gonna insert it. You son of a bitch! The landscape of the series is a nationwide civil war, and that is much more easily put in the films because you were able to cut away to District 5, 7, and 11 to show the uprisings. Whereas you were not able to do that in the books. That is the one downfall in having chosen to tell the story through an unreliable narrator, is that you just don't get those things in the book. I do kind of prefer the last two movies to the last book, but they were all still really good. So those were my thoughts on The Hunger Games in comparison to other YA novels. I think it is one of the best series of our generation, and it is a thing that I will go back to again and again. I love that series so much. That is the video, but before you leave, I want you to tell me in the comments what you would have preferred to see in a prequel or sequel book as opposed to The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Would you have preferred to see a Hunger Games from one of the other victors that we see in Catching Fire? Would you like to have seen an uprising in the Capitol? Because I think that would have been so cool. Personally, myself, I would have liked to have seen a novella about Thresh. Let the record show that Molly says Thresh writes. He is such a cool character and so underrated. I'm pretty sure he has one confirmed kill, and it was Clove, and it was a revenge kill. Spares Katniss's life and claims this huge swath of land in the arena just for himself, and people ignore him because he's so big and scary. Like, what a cool dude. Like, I want to know more about that guy. So let me know in the comments down below what you would have liked to have seen in lieu of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Don't forget to like this video, comment down below, follow me on Instagram, and subscribe to this channel for more content like this. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!